It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I saw it. That ugly neon orange slip stuck to my front door like a badge of shame. My heart sank as I pulled it off the doorframe, the adhesive tugging at the paint underneath. Immediate hold fee increase, $500 monthly. The words hit me like a hammer. My hands tightened around the paper as I read the violation details underneath. Excessive vehicles on property. 3 cars. That's what this was about. My work truck, which I needed to keep my construction business running. My wife Sarah's SUV, which she needed for her night shifts at the hospital. And the used Honda we bought for our daughter's 16th birthday last month. 3 perfectly normal cars in our own driveway. My jaw clenched as I glanced out the window. And there she was, Karen Mitchell, our ever-smug HOA president, patrolling the neighborhood with her ridiculous pink clipboard and matching measuring tape. Her manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the plastic cover as she strolled down the sidewalk, eyes scanning the houses like a hawk. I watched as she stopped at my driveway, whipped out her phone, and started taking pictures. Again, James! My wife Sarah's voice floated in from the living room. Is that Karen again? Yeah. I rubbed my temple. 3rd time this week. Maybe we should just park the Honda in the garage? Sarah suggested, stepping into the kitchen with a tired expression. The garage is full of your medical supplies and my work equipment. Exactly like we explained at the last HOA meeting. And exactly like Karen ignored. Sarah sighed, setting her coffee down with a frustrated clink. She's not going to stop, is she? No, I said, my tone sharpening. But maybe it's time to stop playing nice. Karen Mitchell had been the HOA president for 8 years. 8 long years of ruling our neighborhood with the charm of a drill sergeant and the empathy of a parking meter. She was the kind of person who handed out fines like candy at Halloween, but only to people she didn't like. Mrs. Johnson, an 82-year-old widow, had been fined last winter for having excessively vibrant roses that disrupted neighborhood color harmony. Meanwhile, Karen's best friend, Susan, had a bright purple fence that somehow never seemed to make it onto the violation list. Last Christmas, Mr. Chun, the high school science teacher, received a $200 fine because his driveway was slightly over the line during a snowstorm. Meanwhile, Karen's husband Bob routinely parked his SUV halfway across the sidewalk, and not a single notice was issued. And now it was my turn. That night, I sat at my desk with the violation notice spread out next to my laptop. I pulled up the HOA's official handbook and started flipping through the pages. My brows furrowed as I read the section on vehicle limits. 2 cars per household, unless garage space is unavailable due to work or medical equipment. I slammed the book shut. She's making it up as she goes. I heard my daughter's car pull into the driveway outside. A moment later, I saw Karen emerge in the shadows, phone in hand, snapping another round of pictures. That's when I decided enough was enough. Karen thought she had power, but what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this for years. 5 years ago, after my father lost his house to an overzealous HOA, I swore I would never let that happen to my family. I started quietly buying up properties in the neighborhood through my real estate company, Sunrise Properties. Every time a house went up for sale, I made sure Sunrise Properties made an offer. But I never used the same name twice. Multiple LLCs, different agents, anonymous purchases. I wanted to make sure no one knew just how much I was buying. And now, I owned 67% of the development. I sat back in my chair, staring at the neatly organized stack of property deeds spread out across my desk. My lawyer had just texted me that the latest closing was finalized that morning. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Sarah stood there, arms crossed. "You been buying houses?" she asked. Quietly, I admitted I had to be smart. "And why didn't you tell me?" "Because if Karen found out before the time was right, it would have ruined everything." She sighed, but her lips curved into a small smile. "And when exactly is the right time?" I smiled back. "Soon." The next morning, I was sitting on my front porch when Karen came strutting up the driveway, her pink clipboard clutched to her chest like a trophy. "Mr. Thompson," she said with a condescending smile, "I trust you received our notice?" "I did." "And I assume you're prepared to comply?" I stood, keeping my expression calm. Actually, Karen, I have a few questions about the legal basis for this fee increase. She waved her hand dismissively. The board has full authority to implement fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings, you'd understand how these things work. I smiled thinly. Oh, I've attended every meeting for the past 5 years. Her eyes narrowed. Through proxy representatives, I added, and I've documented everything, every questionable fee, every selective enforcement, every abuse of power. Her smile faded. Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson. Right, but it's funny how some rules apply more than others. Her jaw twitched. The board is holding an emergency meeting tonight. We'll be discussing additional measures about problem properties. Looking forward to it, I said. She turned on her heel and marched down the driveway. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my lawyer. Everything's in place. The text read. Tonight was the night. The community center was packed that evening. Karen had done her job, whipped the neighborhood into a frenzy over rising property values and community standards. Karen stood at the podium, a slide deck glowing behind her. Photos of my cars were splashed across the screen, shot at strategic angles to make my driveway look like a used car lot. Mr. Thompson's property, Karen said sweetly, has become a traffic hazard and a blight on our neighborhood's reputation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's loyalists in the front row nodded enthusiastically. I stood from my seat in the back. Point of order, Madam President. Karen's smile tightened. Mr. Thompson, you're not recognized. Actually, I said, pulling a thick folder from my briefcase, according to HOA bylaw section 7.3, any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures. Karen's eyes narrowed. What are you getting at? I walked to the front of the room and laid the folder on the table. I opened it and spread out the deeds, one by one. I thought it might interest everyone to know, I said, that Sunrise Properties now owns 67% of the homes in this development. Karen's face paled. And as CEO of Sunrise Properties, I continued, I am now the majority owner of this HOA. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's hand trembled on the podium. But we can talk about that in a moment, I said. First, I'd like to ask Karen about the $50,000 that went missing from the HOA's pool renovation budget last summer. Karen's mouth fell open. And perhaps we should also review the surveillance photos you've been taking, including the ones where you measure my grass at 3 a.m. Karen stumbled backward. Shall we put to a vote? I said, smiling. And in that moment, I knew the neighborhood was mine. The air in the community center was thick with tension. Karen Mitchell stood frozen at the podium, her manicured hand gripping the side like it was the only thing holding her upright. The sound of my property deeds slapping onto the table still echoed in my ears. The room was alive with whispers, neighbors shifting in their seats, eyes darting from me to Karen. Shall we put to a vote? I repeated, my voice calm. Karen's eyes narrowed. This is a violation of procedure, she snapped. Actually, it's not, I said, my smile widening. As majority owner of the HOA, I have the right to call a vote, and I think the residents might have some thoughts about the leadership of this association. Karen's face flushed red as the room erupted into murmurs again. Some of her loyalists at the front row, Susan, Bob, and the Thompsons, looked at her with visible uncertainty. I'd suggest we take a moment to review a few interesting documents before we vote, I said, gesturing to the folders still sitting on the table. I watched Karen's knuckles whiten as I spread out the papers. These are the HOA's financial reports from the past 3 years, specifically the pool renovation budget. That information is privileged, Karen hissed. It's public record, I countered. And according to these records, $50,000 was allocated to pool improvements last summer. I picked up one of the documents and held it up, but strangely, the pool never got fixed. Karen opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You approved this expense, Karen. Where did the money go? And here, I continued, holding up another document, are the HOA's landscaping contracts. You signed off on them, and the payment conveniently went to a company owned by your son. Gasps. Whispers. Mrs. Rodriguez leaned over to Mr. Chun, her eyes wide. That's not true, Karen stammered. Oh, it's true, I said, smiling. I had a forensic accountant go through every transaction from the past 5 years. Shall I continue? Karen's lips tightened. I could feel the room shifting. Karen wasn't in control anymore. I was. Let's take a break, Karen said suddenly, her voice thin. No, I said, stepping toward the podium. We're not finished yet. Karen's hand shot toward the gavel. But I slid the financial report toward her. Before you bang that little hammer, I said, you might want to hear what else I found. Her gaze flicked toward Bob, who was sitting in the front row, sweating through his button-down shirt. Bob, I said, locking eyes with him, did you know Karen signed a $10,000 check for miscellaneous HOA expenses last year? Bob's face went pale. That money, I continued, paid for Karen's trip to Maui. Karen's head snapped toward Bob. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I was attending a leadership conference. Karen's voice cracked. I chuckled. Strange. I have the hotel bill. It's for a deluxe suite with a spa package, and it's conveniently dated during your so-called conference. Karen's mouth twisted into a grimace. You're twisting this. Oh, am I? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a large poster board. I flipped it over. It was a photograph of Karen sitting poolside in Maui, drink in hand, captioned, "Thanks to all my rule-breaking neighbors for funding this vacation." The room exploded. Mrs. Johnson, who sat quietly in the back row, stood up. I paid $200 for a rose bush violation last year while you were drinking cocktails on my dime. That's not, Karen sputtered. And here's the best part, I said. Since I now own 67% of the properties in this neighborhood, I have the power to motion for a vote. Karen's eyes widened. I motion to dissolve the current board, I said. Bob Chin from 2 doors down stood. I second that. Karen's mouth fell open. This is illegal. No, Karen, I said, it's democracy. Karen's hands were visibly shaking now. Her eyes darted toward the back of the room, where the HOA's attorney stood frozen, his face pale. How did you? 5 years, I said. 5 years of careful planning. 5 years of strategic purchases. I own 67% of the properties, which gives me the legal authority to call a vote on HOA leadership. No, Karen whispered. I smiled. Yes. You manipulated the system. I played by your rules, Karen. I just played the long game. Karen stepped back, shaking her head. This isn't over. I picked up the gavel from the podium. All in favor of removing the current HOA board? Hands shot up across the room. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Chun, Mrs. Johnson, Bob, and at least 24 other neighbors. Majority vote, I said, setting the gavel down. Karen, your services are no longer required. Karen's face twisted into a scowl. You'll regret this. I smiled. I doubt it. As Karen stumbled toward the door, I cleared my throat. One more thing, I said. She froze. I clicked a button on my laptop. The projector behind me lit up with security footage. Here's Karen. I said, measure my grass at 3 a.m., a few gasps from the audience. Karen's eyes widened. Here she is photographing my daughter's car. Karen's mouth opened in horror. And here, I said, clicking again, she's placing a violation notice on Mrs. Rodriguez's house while ignoring the bright purple fence next door. That's not. Oh, and this one's my favorite. I clicked again. A clip showed Karen yelling at Mrs. Johnson, berating her for not shoveling her driveway fast enough, while Mrs. Johnson was in the hospital with pneumonia. Karen's face was chalk white. This isn't you can't. I'm not finished, I said. I picked up another folder. These are bank statements. I held them up. Payments Karen made using HOA funds for personal shopping trips, vacations, and home improvements. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Karen, would you like to explain why the HOA paid for your new patio furniture? Karen's mouth opened and closed. I have more. I set the folder down. We can go through it piece by piece if you like. Karen's hands curled into fists. Or, I smiled. You can resign. She stared at me. You're bluffing. Try me. Karen stood frozen for a moment. Then her shoulders sagged. She turned toward Bob, who was already edging toward the door. I resign. The room erupted in cheers. Karen turned on her heel and stalked toward the exit. But I wasn't done. Karen, I called after her. She stopped. You might want to check your car, I said. I believe there's a parking violation on your windshield. Her eyes flashed with fury as she stormed out the door. And just like that, her reign was over. As the door slammed shut behind Karen, Mrs. Johnson stood. I vote to elect James as interim president, she said. More hands shot up. Bob Chin stood. Seconded. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. Let's rebuild this neighborhood the right way. I smiled. I'm in. As the applause rose around me, I thought of my father. He would have been proud. Karen had underestimated me, and now the neighborhood was mine. The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt deafening as the room fell into stunned silence. Karen's heels clicked sharply against the linoleum floor as she stormed toward the exit, her face flushed with humiliation. Her husband, Bob, scurried after her, clutching a folder of papers like it might shield him from the fallout. But I wasn't finished yet. As a majority owner, I said, stepping back toward the podium, I motioned to formally remove Karen Mitchell as HOA president and dissolve the current board, effective immediately. Karen froze at the doorway, her hand gripping the brass handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. You can't do this, she shouted, her voice sharp and brittle. This is illegal. It's well within the HOA bylaws. I replied calmly. I'm sure you've read them. I smiled, since you weaponized them against the neighborhood for the past 8 years. All in favor? I said, turning toward the room. Mrs. Johnson's frail hand shot into the air first. I second that motion. Bob Chin added, standing. A ripple went through the room as hands went up, one after another. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Chun, the Thompson family. Even some of Karen's former loyalists hesitated before raising their hands. Karen spun toward them, her mouth opening in disbelief. You can't side with him. You fined me $200 for having a wreath on my door past January, Mr. Thompson said coldly. You fined me for my grandson's car being in the driveway while he helped repair my roof, Mrs. Rodriguez added, her voice trembling with anger. The final blow came from Mrs. Johnson, whose soft voice carried through the room like a knife. You charged me $150 for having a bird feeder too low, while you were using our fees to go on vacation. Karen's face twisted. The tally was clear. Majority vote, I said. Karen Mitchell is hereby removed as president of the HOA. Karen's eyes widened in shock. You'll regret this. I doubt it, I replied. Karen's mouth twisted into a scowl. This isn't over. It is for you, I said. And then Karen Mitchell, queen of the HOA, walked out the door, her crown shattered beneath her designer heels. Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight. Even after the vote, I knew she wasn't going to disappear quietly. 2 days later, I got the call from my lawyer. Karen's filed a lawsuit, he said. Of course she did, I muttered. She's claiming you violated HOA rules by acquiring properties through anonymous LLCs. She's also demanding that you relinquish voting rights in the association. Let me guess, I said, leaning back in my chair. She's trying to claim I manipulated the system? Exactly. I smiled. Let her try. Karen must have thought she had an ace up her sleeve. Maybe she believed some obscure HOA clause would save her. But what she didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment for years. In the courtroom, Karen showed up with her high-priced attorney and her signature smug smile. I showed up with facts. My lawyer stood before the judge with a thick binder of documents. Your Honor, the purchases made by Sunrise Properties were legal under state real estate law. Furthermore, the HOA bylaws make no restrictions on property acquisition by individual owners or legal entities. Karen's lawyer shuffled his papers, sweat glistening on his forehead. And there's more, my lawyer continued. He slid a stack of papers toward the judge. Financial records showing misuse of HOA funds. Specifically, transactions involving unauthorized personal expenses, and selective enforcement of violations. Karen's lawyer visibly paled. Karen's smirk faltered. The judge flipped through the documents. His gaze hardened. "This is serious misconduct," the judge said. Karen's mouth opened, but the judge raised his hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've been in a position of power for years. The evidence here shows that you've abused that power repeatedly." Karen's lawyer weakly objected, but the judge dismissed it. "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge said, "you are hereby barred from holding any future leadership position within this HOA. The financial mismanagement and selective enforcement documented here warrant an immediate audit of the HOA's finances." Karen's mouth twisted. "This is—" The judge banged the gavel. "Dismissed." I turned toward Karen as she sat frozen at the table, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. I smiled. "Told you it was over." After the court ruling, the neighborhood changed fast. Karen's loyalists crumbled under pressure. The former board members resigned within days. Some tried to act like they hadn't been part of Karen's inner circle. But everyone knew the truth. We held an emergency election 2 weeks later. Bob Chin was elected as the new treasurer. Mrs. Rodriguez was chosen as head of neighborhood maintenance. Mrs. Johnson, sweet Mrs. Johnson, became the head of the neighborhood social committee. And me, I was unanimously elected as the new HOA president. The first order of business? Rewriting the HOA's rules. Fairly this time. We removed the ridiculous vehicle limits. Families were allowed to park more than 2 cars in their driveways. No more fines for reeds, bird feeders, or excessive rose colors. We started using HOA fees for things that actually mattered: fixing the broken playground, repairing the pool, and offering assistance to elderly residents who couldn't afford home repairs. 3 weeks after Karen's removal, property values went up by 15%. More importantly, the neighborhood felt lighter. Kids were playing basketball in the driveways. Families were chatting over fences instead of glaring at each other from behind closed blinds. And Karen? Karen sold her house and left. Rumor had it she moved to a gated community across town, one with stricter rules and an iron-fisted HOA president. Fitting. The last time I saw Karen was the day the moving truck pulled into her driveway. She was standing on the sidewalk, wearing oversized sunglasses and her usual stiff posture. I could see her husband, Bob, loading boxes into the truck, his head down. I walked over, hands in my pockets. "Need any help?" I said, smiling. Karen's lips curled. "I hope you're happy." "Actually, I am," I said. "The neighborhood's doing great." She scoffed. "You ruined this place." "No, Karen," I said. "I saved it." She pushed her sunglasses up her nose and turned toward her car, but then she stopped, her eyes widening. A bright orange ticket sat beneath her windshield wiper. Karen's mouth twisted. "What the hell is this?" I smiled. "Looks like a parking violation." Her mouth opened in outrage, but I turned away. "Oh, don't worry." I called over my shoulder. "I'm sure the new HOA president will handle it fairly." She yanked the ticket from the windshield and climbed into her car with a scowl. The engine roared as she peeled away from the curb. The neighborhood watched her go, without a single tear shed.